this self-editing, self-censoring for the approval of others, right? For that external validation of where I know so many people feel stuck. And I definitely can get caught in this at times as well. And I don't want to be
Mhm.
caught in what wants to come through, be censored because I'm concerned or obsessed about what you might think.
Yeah, I think the practice is we've got to learn how to stay in the center of our being and constantly come back to that. Stay in my heart center as I'm listening to you and as I'm talking right now in this moment. And so instead of listening to your words, I'm listening to the frequency, I'm listening to the space between those words. And it's not hearing here, it's hearing in my entire body because you're missing out on so much additional information when you're just hearing up here. We have so much non-sensory perception that's happening and we just have to learn how to tune into it, which is a long and slow process. And then trusting that my response is going to be the thing that needs to come out, even if I don't understand it. And that's really the
Mm.
biggest piece is like I've gotten to a point now where I'm starting to trust this more and I've said things that I have not understood and the person on the other side of the screen is broken down into tears immediately because it was the thing that needed to be said.
Jay, take two. The whole Zoom just crashed. And it was so perfectly fitting too, because that recording's not salvageable, but it's like this is a 2.0. We're talking about human 2.0. We're talking about our own evolution, spiritually, cosmically, the whole thing. So, anyway, welcome back again to Fire and Soul.
Thank you so much. I know synchronistic that it happened right when we hit record because we talked for like 30 minutes before we did. And right when we started is when it went.
I know it's been a while, just to kind of catch everyone up, because I'm just so grateful that we're connecting. You feel like a soul buddy to me. You did from the moment I saw your very first video that I saw on your YouTube channel, which was how to read a Gene Keys profile. And you're like, what? You listened to that or watched that? I was like, yeah, 4 times. Because it was the first video that I had ever come across in my on my path of really loving the Gene Keys and being so devoted to that, for me to really evolve, that I could understand what the Gene Keys were a little bit more, or at least, the sort of premise of that profile. And anyway, so I was so grateful to bring you on the show, which ended up being such a popular conversation. And so now it's kind of like a 2.0 in so many ways. And when we last connected, I had just moved to Austin, maybe a month in, and a lot was going on for me at the time, a bit of an initiation to say the least, which we can go into later. But I want to hear from you. How have you been? It's been maybe 6 months. A lot of life has happened for you on the YouTube channel. I love watching the arc of your own growth in your service and your leadership and your expression. And yeah, just wherever you feel like you want to drop in from there, because I know our listeners and viewers are very happy to see you back.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's really been a time of both spiritual deepening for me and also deepening into the more human side of things and letting go of I carry a lot of burden around wanting to show up a certain way in front of people. And I've realized how much that has really limited my expression and me saying what people need to hear in some way, shape, or form. It's like I felt this thing come through and I stopped it because I was worried about what the response was going to be on the other end. So the past 6 months has really been a journey of learning that I can trust what those things are and learning that sometimes the biggest service that I can be with people is to kind of poke the bear a little bit and to say things that get somebody riled up and to trust into that. And yeah, the channel has just continued to grow on a steady arc at this point, and I'm really exploring different formats and areas. So yes, I talk a lot about the Gene Keys, but I also talk about Hermetic philosophy and alchemy and lots of different esoteric systems because I really believe that all of them are trying to convey this underlying energy of love. And so I'm doing my best to help people get unstuck of being attached to any particular system and
Mhm.
instead to identify with what the systems are trying to get across. And they're just all using different words to point to that same energy that I think all of us can feel right now on a really deep level as things start to shift and change, both internally in our own worlds and externally as we look around.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, a couple things. I want to absolutely come back to you feel called to help people. I'm paraphrasing probably unplug or unhook from any particular system. But before that, it was this huge deep dive of where I know so many people feel stuck, and I definitely can get caught in this at times as well. It coordinates with my core sacred wound of self-obsession, but this self-editing, canceling, censoring, for the approval of others, right? For that external validation. And you mentioned that you've really been on this deep journey for the past 6 months. So for those who are still stuck in that, I mean, what are you suggesting, or what would be something that you could recommend of just an easy place to start to just no longer, it's a funny thing. It's not that I don't want to give a fuck. Sorry for the language. I actually do. I care very deeply. But at the same time, I don't want to be
Mhm.
caught in what wants to come through, be censored because I'm concerned or obsessed about what you might think. And it's a huge problem for a lot
Right.
of
Yeah, it's
people.
actually the opposite. It's totally. And it's not that I don't give a fuck, it's that I give too many fucks. Like I'm so cognizant and aware of how my words are going to impact another person that I oftentimes wouldn't speak what I knew needed to be spoken in that moment. And
Mm,
as far as advice, for me, the way that this shows up is interesting. Like when I'm making a YouTube video, none of it is there. For me, this really shows up when I'm in relationship with another person. It's in those moments that I really feel this thing. And what happens is my awareness leaves my heart and my belly and it makes its way up to my head.
mm,
And when that happens, I essentially start running everything through the filter of my mental body and through my thoughts and through story. And I lose track of reality and with the now present moment. So, really, I think the practice is at its core a meditation practice. And on one level, right, we've got to learn how to stay in the center of our being and constantly come back to that.
mm,
And that's where it all starts, right? And that's why I think that's where most people probably need to be at first. But then eventually we have to learn how to take that being out into the world as we interact with different things and different situations and different places. And so then it becomes a game. And it's literally a game that I play with myself of, can I stay in my heart center as I'm listening to you and as I'm talking right now in this moment? And so instead of listening to your words, I'm listening to the frequency, I'm listening to the space between those words. And I'm trusting that what comes through that I actually hear, and it's not hearing here, it's hearing in my entire body. What I hear is what I need to hear, and then trusting that my response is going to be the thing that needs to come out, even if I don't understand it. And that's really the
mm,
biggest piece. Is like I've gotten to a point now where I'm starting to trust this more, and I've said things that I have not understood, and the person on the other side of the screen is broken down into tears immediately because it was the thing that needed to be said.
mhm,
And so that's the next version of this practice. And starting with very simple, basic things, doing the dishes, driving in the car, these things where it's still probably just you, but you start interacting with other things, but you're doing it from this place of being centered in your being and not rushing to get through it, not hurrying so that you can get to the next thing, just full presence. And then we can start to bring in maybe a podcast or like some outside information that's coming in, because even that we can feel in our internal state where we go from this grounded, centered, heart led presence to shoop up here. And I'm thinking about all the things that are happening and I'm fitting it into different frameworks and running it through my past and what I predict to be the future. And so we catch ourselves in those moments. We stop, we come back into our center, and then we can continue to listen from that place, because you're missing out on so much additional information when you're just hearing up here. Like we have so much non-sensory perception that's happening, and we just have to learn how to tune into it, which is a long and slow process.
Beautifully put. And just for those who are listening and not able to see, which I know is the predominant audience of Fire and Soul, when he says not listening from here, he's pointing to like the mind, right? The
Yes,
mind.
yes.
And I couldn't agree more. It's so interesting. What you just shared is also helpful for me because you and I are actually opposite of when I'm in stream of consciousness when I'm with someone. And when I'm coaching a
Interesting.
client or when I'm, running a group or running a retreat or whatever, like I feel at total ease, no notes, no pre-planned questions, just in flow. I trust that. I trust myself in that. What wants to come through will come through. However, when I go solo, and I
Mhm.
and I shared this in a solo that I put out last week, and that is I will censor myself, I'll filter it, I will second guess it, I will cancel it, re-record it, sometimes 3, 4 times. My editor Mark knows this to be true. And that's in the last 6 months. It just became like my core sacred wound of self-obsession in the Gene Keys realm that came up and I was like, whoa, it is so up to be healed, right? It's so coming through. So I can just see how pervasive it really has been in my life. And it served me in many, many ways. But it is interesting. As soon as I'm alone, oh, it's there. But it's wild that you and I both have it. We have it because we're human, but it shows up in a different dynamic. You're like, I'm good when I'm just in my meditation chair, at my dining table or wherever, you have all these different backgrounds. But I still love that because when I'm on my own, let's just say I'm never alone and I can be fully present, for example, with the camera, which is a harder thing for me to do these days. And this is what I've taught. This is what I do. But it's just this whole other way of being that's demanding me to be fully present in my heart. That's what
I'm
I'm picking,
curious,
what you said.
do you know what your line is for your core wound?
I can look it up. Hold
Because I'm
on.
wondering if that has anything to do, because I'm a line one there, which line one is all about like going within, right? So in other words, I feel comfortable within. It's all about stability. It's all about security. It's about um,
Hmm.
essentially going inside and being with the inner landscape. And so because of that, I think that's where I feel comfortable. And then when I come out with that, that's when that core wound really starts to show up because I'm so much more comfortable in that inner space.
That's super interesting. I don't know what you're going to say. I have a thought on what it could be. It's line 4. So sales and
Okay.
communication. So what
Yep.
would be your interpretation of that?
Yeah, so sales and communication is actually, and this is a very common thing. So, in your Gene Keys profile, for anyone that is kind of following along here, if you go to Gene Keys and get your free profile on the page that you print out, and even what's there, what's going to be listed in your where the core wound is actually the lines of your vocation, because that sphere actually holds two different energies, right? So in our Venus sequence, it is the energy that is our deepest wound. It's what, like Michelle has referenced, is called our core wound, which, just to give you a background for those that don't know, is something that we get at conception. Meaning, there is nothing that happened in our lives that led to this wound.
Mm,
It comes because it is a part of being human.
mm,
And if you want to contact that wound, all you have to do is sit down in a chair or on a meditation cushion and close your eyes for 5 minutes. And I promise, before that 5 minutes is over, you're going to feel some tightness. You're going
mm,
to feel some tension. You're going to feel some anxiety. And it might be a really low level, but nonetheless, there's something there, this sense of unease that shows up.
mm,
And that's your core wound.
mm,
But then ultimately, what we're able to do once we understand that core wound and see it for what it is in our lives, and we're able to transmute it and alchemize it, is then we can, that very thing becomes the thing that we press into service of the whole. And it
mm,
becomes what's termed your vocation in the Gene Keys. And your vocation is simply, think of this as the inner engine, the inner turbine that drives your outer doing in the world. So it might not have anything to do with what you're actually doing. It has everything to do with why you wake up in the morning and do what it is that you do. So it's this like inner turbine that pushes us forward. And the lines there are a little bit different. And so if you toggle them on the Gene Keys profile, you can see what they are. But like my line there, the first line is repression. And so these are wounds that are archetypal in nature that really drive our behavior in a big way. And especially here at the core, it's really the gene key that flavors the line instead of the line that flavors the gene key, meaning that the predominant energy here is oftentimes the line energy.
Mm.
And so for me, it's repression. And what I'm repressing ultimately is this deep seated sense of fear and separation, right? I pretend that I'm okay, that I can handle this on my own, that I'm in control. And all of these are illusion. All of these are our ways of trying to deal with this frequency. And so we go and we bust our ass at work to accumulate as many resources as we can. We show up in ways to get as many different people to like us as is humanly possible. We do all of these things to try and protect ourselves from this fear because we think that we can solve it outside of us. But in reality, this is a fear that cannot go away unless you take your inner eye and you turn towards it and see it for what it actually is. And in that moment, then we have a choice to acknowledge it and to realize that it's not going anywhere, but we also don't have to listen to it, right? What the gene keys teach us and what all of alchemy teaches us, what all of these systems teach us is that we can use that energy when we learn Tantra, when we learn how to bring it up our energy centers and how to turn it into creativity and press it into service. And so now circling all the way back, your line 4 is the wound of rejection. So if you take that and you tie that to your 10th gene key, which is self-obsession, naturalness, and being. And again, for the uninitiated, self-obsession is the shadow frequency, the lower expression, if you will. Naturalness is the gift frequency, which is like the creative expression. So we take that energy and we figure out how to use it, how to create with it. And then we've got the city, which is the divine expression of that particular energy. And so it's pretty easy to tell the story with rejection and with self-obsession, right? If we put those two together, we're terrified that we're not going to be accepted. And when we're terrified we're not going to be accepted, our awareness goes to ourselves so that we can try and present ourselves in a way that I can be accepted by the other people that are in my tribe. And ultimately, these wounds go all the way back hundreds of thousands of years to our awareness that was operating, on the savannah. And what we equate rejection to is death. We are going to die if we are cast out of the tribe. Because you died if you were cast out of the tribe. You could not survive alone back then. And we have the same operating system right now. And so that's the story. And that's what keeps us locked in these fear states is we're trying to overcome hundreds of thousands, millions of years of evolution. And our awareness is only so strong. And so that's where faith comes in. We can't do it ourselves. We've got to understand ultimately the inner workings of the universe. And when you understand that, well, it becomes a lot easier to have courage and to move through the world in a way that puts love out front, which involves dying to yourself. You have to choose that death. And when you choose that death, you get to be reborn.
So beautifully said. Wow. Oh, so much for not diving super deeply into the gene keys as we next, but
We can put a pin in it. I just wanted to touch on it.
No, but there's more here. There's more here because as I shared in the first solo episode that I put out of this show for this year, I talked about coming out of a dark night of the soul and an egoic death yet again. There were so many in there, but this one was so deeply embedded with the self-obsession, and it's still there. There's more layers, for sure. But I'm not surprised that it came on so starkly. When I was choosing to leave everything I knew and loved in LA, in those mountains, those lands, that Pacific Ocean in Malibu, like this was my home. And I resonate with the vibration of California, and my family was nearby and all those things. But I was being called into the Austin area on mission, and I knew it. But this is where it was like, will I be accepted there? Well, I'm just kind of putting it all together. And then knowing what I was called into Austin for, and it was like, it feels also part of the divine mission, which I want to be clear. Divine mission for me has very little to do with like what we do for vocation. It's just part of it, right? But it's this, do I have the courage? Can I break through some of those programmed fears and that conditioning to step fully into what's calling me forward? And so all of this was happening. And then I was getting invited at the same time when I did arrive into Texas, into these masterminds and dojos and all these places with the people that actually inspired the move.
Hmm.
And it was like suddenly I was meeting them and communing with them and being inspired by them, and it not being a disappointment. It was like, wow, this feels a lot like what it's been like listening to their show for 2, 3 years, right? And just the people in the space that I was so activated by, and that like, okay, that's it, you're going. And but all of a sudden new eyeballs were on me. You know what I mean? And so then I was looking at myself from this new lens of, am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I enough? All kinds of things. While simultaneously, oh my God, I'm being super honest here, but this is the only way I know to be. While simultaneously working with a group of women that I love with my heart, but that I knew I was shifting into something else that wanted to come through me, but that it didn't feel aligned or appropriate for that particular group for the most part.
Hmm.
And that's just the way that it is, right? You did a video recently on like when we have opposing views or when we're not really operating from that same lens of perception. There's no hierarchy, there's no judgment. It's just that we're aware we have different viewpoints of reality right now. So I was going through this huge shift in my own conscious awareness while recognizing that almost everybody that I was had the honor to guide wasn't there, while being so called into what was there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so then
Yeah.
self-obsession was just like so in my face to be alchemized. And I
Mhm.
don't even really know if that makes sense, but I know you probably followed that. So if there's anything there that you want to just add on to that could be helpful for our listeners or viewers of like what they're navigating and like this real reality of like what no longer is, what we're kind of in, but we don't know what that is, what seems to be pulling us forward, we don't even know what that is. So we're just in it with all of our
Right.
shadows to boot.
I mean, really, what that brought up for me is this idea of the difference between knowing something and believing something.
Hmm.
And the only way to bridge that gap is to have the courage to do the thing, right? There are so many texts that are out there and so many teachers that are all saying the exact same thing, which is you are divinely supported. You are going to be okay as long as you put love first in what you're doing. You are going to work, everything is going to work out if you are there to be of service for the whole.
Mm.
However, and lots and lots and lots of people logically or intellectually believe that.
Mhm,
But there is a very, very big gap between intellectually or logically believing that and actually moving through the world in that way.
mhm,
Meaning, if you're constantly stressed out, running around, worried, trying to control things, even though logically you believe that there is a higher power looking out for you, you're trying to look out for you. And that tells me that you don't actually, in the core of your being, know that to be true.
yes.
And so, what we have to do is take the risk. And when you take the risk, then you know from that moment on, you know, okay, there is something here that is in charge, that is taking care of this for me. You know, you asked kind of what has happened over the past 6 months for me. That's another big piece of it is that, right? And I'm my background is one where a lot of my life has worked out, and it's been rough also. You know, I've got both sides. I have a rough upbringing, and if you're curious, you can go back to the last episode to hear about that a little bit more. But I've also had a big business with 20 people working for me and making millions of dollars, and like that whole thing has been there also. And so I've had proof that, hey, what you do is supported and works out. The big difference, though, is that was all driven by fear. That was all driven by trying to prove something out into the world. And so now, can I do it again, but this time do it from a place of surrender?
Yeah.
Do it from a place of just knowing that I show up as myself, which that's been another big sigh of relief, is I just get to be myself everywhere I go.
Mm.
And I don't have to worry. I'm not doing any marketing. I'm not doing any, like, nothing. And it's all just like, I barely have a website. I've got a garbage camera that I shoot YouTube videos on. Like, all of it is, I'm just kind of in faith that what is needs to happen is going to happen. And that's exactly what has happened. You know, I financially, things have been going really well. And then I hit this really long patch where no money came in, and it felt like a test, right? It felt like, are you going to go back to trying to pull all these different levers, or are you going to sit here and do what you've been doing that's led you to here in the first place? And I had enough awareness to sit in it, and now it's cracked open and it is flowing again. So I
Mm.
say all that to let the listeners know that you have a choice. Which story do you want to listen to? Do you want to listen to all of the wisdom teachings that have been passed down to us for thousands of years that tell you all those things that I just told you? Or do you want to listen to what culture and society tells you, which is that you got to kill yourself, you got to hustle, you got to do everything that you can to accumulate as many resources as is humanly possible, because a moment might come that you might need them?
Yeah.
Right? Both stories are out there. And when I realized that, when I realized I had a choice, that's really when things started to shift and change.
Yeah, I totally feel that. There are a lot of different threads, but let me just really connect with what wants to come through, because where I got super snagged in a really good way at the top of this conversation for 2.0 version, um, was when you talked about how there used to be so much self-censoring, right? And you weren't being your authentic expression, and how I know that stopped so many people. And then I was sharing about my literal shadow of self-obsession. And then we were talking about the lines, etc. And then really what you would offer is you got to just do the thing, right? Like that's the only antidote, is like you got to do the thing. And this is what I've been teaching for so long. But there is something else to be said for the embodiment piece, which you said is like believing and knowing, right? That's that embodiment piece of, am I really held?
Mm-hmm.
Am I trusting that all will be taken care of, that I'm guided, that I'm well resourced, and that this is part of that mission, and that my only job right now is just to trust? And that is a whole different energetic. And so even though I may have the self-obsession piece still come up, and probably will for the rest of my life, and so be it. It's like I'm in a new relationship with it now. I'm not shaming myself over it now, because it's like, oh yeah, you're so familiar, but I had no idea you were there my whole life and how you were running the show, right? And then getting present to that and be like, oh, but now working with it, like alchemizing it to that point. But there is something to be said for being able to see all of that and to relax into the unknown that you and I are both experiencing right now. It's like I'm having a massive shift, you're having a massive shift, but so are so many who are willing to be courageous enough. I want to just say who are willing to be willing to kind of look at what's happening in life right now, in the collective, on the macro, that obviously is a reflection of what is happening on the micro. So can you speak more into that right now? Just for
Yeah.
anybody
Yeah. So
yeah.
there's this really, really difficult middle ground, which is, I think, where a lot of people find themselves right now, right? There's one side where it's really easy, which is just we're totally unconscious. And when you're unconscious, everything's great, right? You don't know any better. Like, things might not be great externally, but you don't know what you don't know. And so everything seems to be moving along just fine. And then we get into this zone of, okay, I believe that there is this thing out there that is looking out for me, and I need to clean up my thinking and the way that I act and the way that I move through the world.
Mm.
And when we start to do that, when we start to clear our mental body, what happens? happens is all the emotions that were trapped under that mental body for so long begin to bubble up to the surface, and they begin to make their way out. And we start to feel all of this sadness, all of this grief, all of this fear. And so you're like, what the hell? I signed up for this thing that is taking care of me, and I changed my thinking. And when I did, I feel so much worse.
Mm.
And then simultaneous to that, there's a gap between when we make this choice and when it actually starts to show up in the external reality.
Mm.
And as you said, because of the workings of karma, and I can't remember if it was in 1.0 or 2.0 of this conversation, but things are speeding up, right?
Yeah.
Things are happening more quickly. And my understanding of that is that if you're familiar with the Akashic record, this thing that holds everything that has happened, it's been around long enough that it's been programmed. Meaning, if you think of like cross country skiing, right? To forge a path on skis is pretty tough and kind of slow. But if the slots are already there, all you have to do is drop your skis in and you really don't even have to think. You're just kind of off and it happens. It's so much less resistance, so much faster. So my understanding is that's what's happened with the Akashic record is it is programmed and the pathways are greased. And when that happens, the return of internal shift and external reality is speeding up. Nonetheless, it's not instantaneous. And so because of that, there's this middle ground where we have got to hold faith, but the fear is still really loud, right? The fear is like, are you sure? Your ego is like, you realize if you're wrong, we're going to die, right? It goes back to that. It really is telling you we're going to die. And if you investigate your fears and keep asking why, I promise you, you'll get there. And don't confuse fear of death. It's not the act of death that we're afraid of. It's the fear of non-existence, right? It's the fear of what comes after we have that happen. But if we are able to look at that fear and say, I hear you and I see you, and I'm going to do this thing anyway. And as long as that thing is something that you know from your heart is the right thing to do, I promise you it is going to work out. And it might be a bumpy road along the way. You might need to learn a few more steps before it does work out. But you just need to remember that you're just stuck in the drama still, and it will work out. It's the reason that story and myth is so important. So those of you that are in this right now, I really encourage you to go to story, go to myth, because all of those are there to teach us that everything always ends in happily ever after. Like you fight the dragon and it ends in happily ever after. So if you're in that place, go and look at our ancient myths and take them in and know that what's on the other side, and I'm just starting to get there, is a place that is so peaceful and allows you to really just be yourself and to really impact the people around you without even needing to say a single word.
Beautifully said. I want to make a distinction in case it wasn't clear. And also, if I wasn't clear, when you say happily ever after, going back to myth, going back to story, you mean ultimately good, the light, love triumphs, right?
You got it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's what I figured. Um, yeah. In the first episode that I put out of for this show for this year, I basically said it's a fuck it kind of a year, or that's how it feels to me. It's kind of like no more holding back, no more. I mean, I feel like I've always been that way, but now I realize, oh, there's so many more layers, right? And so it feels like it's like, it's just like I don't know if you've seen that meme out there on social media where it's like Kermit the Frog, dun 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 dun. It's like the 7,527,000 awakening. I'm ready. World coming out of the trash can. I freaking love that meme so much because that's how I feel almost daily. And if I'm honest about that, I really love it. I really actually love kind of being in this caterpillar soup, forever. And But what I wanted to offer about that is that, these things that we tell ourselves could be threatening to our own, yes, eternal existence, right? That's how deep the programming can be. I remember thinking that if I shared my lens of perception on certain things, the COVID era, the pandemic, all of that, which then takes us to this moment, Agenda 2030, most of my listeners and viewers are totally on the same page. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to turn off my current clients, future clients, the whole thing. And it turns out, no, what it did was it just little bits and pieces that I share now. It's like, no, it actually validates that so many of them are already there,
Mhm.
that we're not alone, that energetically we've found each other without even necessarily having to say anything. And those who can't necessarily see it, I don't want to be a deterrent. I don't want anything to come in between us having a connection, right? Because this is just one little life. It's one little myopic reality happening on this planet at this time. And while it might be super grand and the most incredible story of all time for humanity, it's still just one little life of mine. I don't want it to make it so precious that I lose connection over content. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, and that's really how I feel. It's like, ooh, we're all just walking each other home, in the words of my favorite spiritual teacher, Ram Dass. And what does home even mean? So that brings me to my next question. Do you believe in reincarnation? Or more importantly, actually, what I should really ask is, I know you do. Do you believe
Mhm.
that we have to reincarnate?
Yeah. So, yes, I believe in reincarnation. And no, I don't believe you have to reincarnate.
Okay, this is
So,
big. So this is actually really sophisticated stuff in my world. Not a lot of people are aware of this or have ever had this conversation. So when did you come into the awareness that we might not have to reincarnate if we choose?
I would say probably a couple years ago, largely, if anyone has ever experienced the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that's probably the best resource that I can point to that talks about an opportunity for us to not come back,
Mm, interesting.
which
Okay.
ultimately is my understanding of what the end game is for all of us at a certain point. Um, Reincarnation is interesting because it's a relative truth, and it's relative to the spirit and the body that we're in right now. And on one level, I believe that there is a piece of us that likely comes back again and again for further purification, if you will. And so that when we reach this moment at the end, we're able to choose, we're able to match the frequency of the light, right? If we talk about near death experiences, we have this light that a lot of people talk about and an opportunity in that moment to move towards it. More often than not, I think what happens is our fear frequency and beliefs that we haven't dealt with during this particular incarnation hold us back from that. And when we get scared in that moment, we have an instant, is how I understand it. And if we get scared in that moment, what ends up happening is a lot of it is unconscious, but the workings of going back into this collective space, getting back into a body and being reborn again start to take hold.
Mm.
So maybe it would be helpful. I want to talk a little bit about in the Buddhist world, it's called the Bardo state. And this is also a teaching from the Gene Keys. It's really in the 22nd Gene Key. So my understanding of how this goes, we have what are called subtle bodies. And of those subtle bodies, we've got our lower nature, which is what we experience with our senses, as well as with the internal state that we're really intimately connected to. So it's our physical body, our astral body, which is just our emotional body, and our mental body, right? And those are the three kind of gross, more dense energies. And those energies are there to evolve, right? To grow and get closer to unity or union back with the Godhead. And that's where the relative, just to hit pause and I'll come back to the subtle bodies, that's where the relative truth is here. It's relative because on another level, you are part of this one thing, right? This one frequency, this one vibration, this emanation from which everything is born out of. And all of our individual souls are this thing. They are a mental projection, essentially, of this thing. And when I say mental there, I mean God's mind, not our mind. So it's a little bit of a different vibe. And so, yes, on the one hand, there's our individual soul that can come back, but on the other hand, there's not. We are part of this one, and there is no individuality. And that is really hard for people because it involves letting go entirely, not just of ego, but also of the spiritual gifts and the spiritual development that you think you've picked up over thousands and thousands of lifetimes.
Mm.
So now to get back to the Bardo states and the subtle bodies. Then we've got three higher bodies. The causal body, which is like our soul, if you will, or another way to think of that is like heart, mind combined. Then we've got the Buddhic body, which is the kind of love of God, right? It's this unified plane that connects all beings. Then we've got the Atmic body, which is the mind of God. It's the divine mind and its truth and its emptiness and its stillness.
Mm.
And so at death, and then, excuse me, one more is the monadic. And the monadic encapsulates all the other six bodies.
Mhm.
Okay. At death, obviously, our physical body is left behind and is a part of Gaia, right? Goes back into feeding the cycle of what is there. Our emotional and mental bodies get drawn up and split apart. And all of the negative, quote unquote, all of the lower vibration frequency things that we did in our lives get kicked back into the collective of humanity. And according to the gene keys, and this is not Tibetan Book of the Dead now, this is gene key specific, sitting in what is considered the junk DNA, the 90% of our DNA that is non-coding DNA, the belief there that that is our past kind of karma that is being held. So all the negative emotion, all the negative thought, all of that gets dropped out because it can't get pulled up, because it can't be held by the frequency of the higher bodies. It's just too dense. It's too heavy. All the positive, all of the higher vibration things that have happened through our emotions and our mind get sucked up into the causal body. So that is the part of us, our soul, if you will, that does on one level survive reincarnation, right? And so the goal is for that causal body to be brighter and brighter and brighter. However, the goal isn't to get that body so bright so that you maintain your individuality, so that you come back, so that you bring all of these other humans up. At a certain point, even service becomes a distraction. Because ultimately, what we are here for is to reunite with the Godhead. And so what that means is all of the gifts that we have picked up along the way, we've got to let go of all of that. And that's where we have this kind of choice moment that I was talking about earlier. And this is more tied to actually the monadic body, which is really beyond words. I can't even really speak into what it is, but it is the Godhead, right? And it is the thing that we are trying is not the right word, but that we're eventually going to be absorbed back into. And so when we die at a certain point, our frequency can match the frequency of that light. And we can see all the distraction that's keeping us here, even the really, really subtle ones, the ones that I can't take the suffering that's happening on this planet. So I'm choosing to come back. But even that, as I said, is a distraction on a very subtle level. And it's a beautiful distraction. And it's a place, from my understanding, that a lot of people in the reincarnative process get stuck for a period of time because it does feel so good to come back and serve and spread love. And that's not the point. The point is to shed your individuality entirely and to come back into union with the one.
Oh, thank you for that. So, a couple questions. Are you in resonance with what I think the Gene Keys teaches? And again, we're opening to the fact that there is no one particular text. Um, that is the sort of be all end all. And that's really important for me to state. It's just my own opinion. Sounds like it's
Mhm.
your opinion as well. That
For
includes the
sure.
Bible, the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, we talked about a lot of different texts, including the Gene Keys for me, which
Yep. Same.
completely changed and transformed my life last year as I was in such deep devotion. I wouldn't change that year for anything. But at the same time, I shifted my relational dynamic with it because I realized it was becoming something that I thought I had to work out all that karma that I not only for this life but all the past lives, and that was the core sacred wound, for example, in the vocation sphere, and I inherited it through my mother and that ancestral lineage, and so it just got so dense that I felt kind of enslaved, to say the least. And then it was like, well, when is it ever enough? And so then I heard this idea that you might not have to come back if you A, are aware, B, choose not to,
Mhm.
but it can be very insidious to want to, because even the all the near death experiences of go to the light, go to the light, go to the light, and then some are saying, our loved ones or those who've passed on are there waving, our beloved dog that died when we were 12 or whatever, right? Is like, come, come, come. And it's like, it could be a trap. It could potentially be a trap
Mhm.
to reincarnate us for maybe the negative polarity to siphon off of us whenever we're feeling down and unworthy and doubtful and full of fear, right? So this is kind of layered, but what I'm trying to get at in my original question is, do you resonate with what I think the Gene Key says is that shadow work, which is that energy, that frequency that's being siphoned, I think, for the sort of negative polarity to be nourished, to exist
Mhm.
for this realm, this planet Earth, and probably around it. Um, that's what the Gene Keys is saying. Is that we have to keep doing that shadow work, not only for ourselves, but for all of humanity to prevail. Is that what you understand it to mean, or that it could mean?
Yeah, my understanding is that actually this isn't even a human thing as much as it's an entire Earth thing. So
Mm.
the same animating principle is in me, is in you, is in this plant that's over here, is in that crystal that's sitting in my room, right? So this is like all of Gaia somehow came into form. And again, this is more intuitive, and people talk about it, but it's really, I think, that one got lonely and got bored and was like, let's do something, right? Let's split this off and let's experience like what is possible with all of these different things and all of these different beings. And so we have gone through a bit of a process, an evolutionary process and an involutionary process. So this is happening in both directions, as I understand it, bottom up and top down, so that we can end up coming back together.
Mhm.
And we started off, I think, a bit more dense probably than we are now, and frequency. And I guess what I'm getting at is, yeah, on some level, I think that we are holding a lot of our collective history inside of ourselves. Now, what is meant to happen with that, I'm not entirely sure, and what degree that is meant to impact us and in a given lifetime, again, I'm not sure. My intuition is it is there to serve as fuel so that we make different choices moving forward.
Mhm. Yeah, and then this convergence, right, of so many things happening on this planet or this realm right now, geologically, astrologically, spiritually. I mean, we've kind of referenced a bit of this, and it's certainly much of the conversation that is had on this show with various embodied luminaries like yourself, just giving their sort of take on it wherever we are in real time. But as we are at this sort of precipice of what does feel intensified and accelerated with some sort of an agenda, some sort of a something that's unfolding. Um, what I guess I'm getting at, and I'm sharing this in case it serves anyone listening, and maybe it's something for you to contemplate for yourself, is that any particular text, rules that has any sort of hierarchy, or you have to do this to earn your position to go there or to go there or to grow or to evolve. Because I found myself saying, just a quick little segue, a lot of last year, like, I must do this work for the evolution of my soul. I
Mhm.
must do this work for the evolution of humanity's consciousness. I mean, it just got so intense. And I think a lot of people are there, and a lot of people don't know that it's possible that that could also be another very sophisticated construct,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Another rule book that's like, oh, this makes more sense, but it's because we are evolving so quickly as a species called human, right now and on this planet. And yes, it is wild, but what a privilege to be here. So we're growing so fast, and our awareness is shifting so deeply that it's easy to get caught up in a, oh, this is the way, when really maybe it's just a more advanced look at where we already were that we thought we had evolved out of. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
It does, yeah. And this is really at the core of what I try and teach when
Mm.
I teach is that so if you go to my YouTube channel, a few videos back is a video that is titled Are the Gene Keys or Human Design or Astrology Holding Your Spiritual Development Back?
Oh, great.
Because so many people are confusing the structure, the system, with what is trying to come through the structure and the system.
Yeah, really well said.
And that really is the over identification with a profile, with the words, with all of that is coming from a place of fear
Yeah.
and a place of not being trusting that you in your own heart know what you need to do. Now, these systems are helpful and useful because it can give you another perspective that maybe you weren't open to in the first place, or it might bring something into your awareness that you never thought about in that particular way. But then you must let go. You cannot attach yourself to that word or that system or that thing because then we depend on it to tell us who we are and what we need to do. And that is not it. Like, you know what you need to do because your heart knows what you need to do. That's what you need to follow. All
Mm.
of this other stuff are just pointers to language at large, is us just trying to capture an energy and put it into words. And the moment we do that, it starts to degrade, it starts to fall apart because all structures are doomed to fail because it's just a law of this 3D reality is that structure cannot last. And so if you attach yourself to structure, it's a matter of time before it falls apart.
So well said. I'm in real resonance there, and that brings us to a next part of the conversation that I was hoping would weave in, which is around what is really happening, in your opinion, to the human. So let me give a little preface, and I don't know if you're aware of Greg Braden's newest work, and where he's so obsessed with pure human, the pure human, the non-vaccinated human, the non-robotic human, the non-trans human, right? Like, so like the organic origin seed. And I know that you are one and I am one, and that's just how it goes right now in this life. But I do feel like there is something in me that wants to help preserve that because I love humanity in its current form. However, I'm also aware that I'm shifting so much in my dream state, in my waking state. Things don't necessarily make sense, but yet everything makes sense. So it's sort of, again, this caterpillar soup, which is just this chrysalis, infinite way of being as we're all learning how to adjust to whatever is happening, that does feel like it's this new way of being either on this planet or beyond, because I plan on being like sayonara. My grandmother, Mary Sherma Horn, she was like, don't call on me, don't ask for me, I'm in other realms, when she passed back in about, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago. Love you, Grandma Mary Sherma Horn. And but so I plan on exiting and being gone and be like, enough is enough. I've done good work. You know what I mean? I do not have to
Mhm.
transmute all of my karma from all of my lifetimes and everyone else's lifetime. And I really say that with so much reverence and gratitude in my heart of what it's been like to actually get to be on this planet. It's been a lot of fun, but I'm also very curious and excited to see other realms. So that said, What is your opinion as to what is happening in your own experience, not based on some text, not based
Mhm.
on some book, your own intuitive sense of what's happening to the human as we know it on this planet or beyond?
Yeah, I think have you caught any of the telepathy tapes at this point?
No, I've been so obsessed with getting my whole status correction complete, my sovereignty stuff, but I know it's next on my list.
Yeah.
It's been calling me.
Yeah. So for the uninitiated, the telepathy tapes is about non-speaking autistic individuals and the spiritual gifts that they have that are beyond questionable at what's available and the tests that you can go to their website and see for yourself the recorded video.
Mm.
Essentially, I think that's where we're headed. So these individuals have an ability. Telepathy is not the right word. What they're doing is tapping into some sort of unified field of consciousness that gives them access to just about everything. Like they tell stories of being both in 3D reality and in this place that they go to put their hand on a book and to just know it, all of it
Mm.
immediately. Like going back to the Matrix, like Neo downloading Kung Fu, right? It was like that level.
And the
And
Akashic
they're
Records.
able to say again.
The Akashic Records.
Yeah, exactly. They're able to tap into the Akashic record.
Yes.
And with that, time goes out the window there, right? So they are prophetic in what they're able to do. They are able to, for example, their caretakers oftentimes are the ones that they have these really deep relationships with, although some of them can do it just with anyone. It doesn't matter who it is. But they would like come back and ask what they ate for lunch, and they would the autistic individual would be able to tell them. And they're like, how did you know that? Like, were you reading my mind? And then the response was no. I can go back and I can astral project and watch you eating in that moment and know what's coming into your body. Anyway, long way of saying, I think that our awareness is going to pull back from our physical body pretty significantly.
Yes. Yes.
And when that happens, I think that the center of awareness as we feel it now up here in our head is going to go away and it's going to drop down into our belly.
Mhm.
And we're going to become more in line with this unified organism that I've been talking about. The big difference is that with all of this stuff, there are subtle layers, right? There's like the individual layer, but then there's a layer where like you can still feel all the individuals even though they're a collective piece, and then there's just the full-on collective where there is no individuality whatsoever. And I think we're entering this middle ground next where essentially there is some degree of transparency where
Mm.
we are going to know what people are thinking. We're
Yes.
going to know what their emotional states are. And when that happens, think about how quickly that cleans up everything that happens on this planet, right?
Yes.
When you can't hide what
Yes.
you're thinking or what you're feeling any longer,
Mhm.
well, you're going to very quickly change what you're thinking and what you're feeling because you don't have a choice anymore.
Mm.
And so as that happens, we start to become interconnected. And as we become interconnected, I think a lot of these spiritual gifts that likely we were in touch with in the time of ancient Egypt, I would say, start to come back online. And we start to be able to do a lot of things that up until this point have been what we considered science fiction.
And what is your own personal experience with some of these gifts coming online as you've noticed in your world?
Yeah, so I have an interesting relationship with this in that I don't ever get a vision. I don't ever get an audible voice. I don't ever like those things are just not my gifts. But what I do get is just a knowing. Like I just know something sometimes. And it's very strong.
Mm.
Like it's guided me for my whole life. At times, I've never known what it is, obviously, and at times I fight against it.
Mhm.
But it's just this sense that I know either what somebody else, like what their energy state is and where they are and what they need to hear or feel, or I know something that I need to do, I guess, is another way of saying it. However, I've got people in my life that have very strong spiritual gifts of other natures, like an ability to communicate with nature, with plants, trees, like a different vision. I mean, there's the gifts run the gambit.
Yeah, beautifully said. Yeah, that clair that you're talking about, I believe that's the claircognizance, also known as the divine knower.
Hmm.
Yeah, that divine
Hmm.
gnosis. Um, what's been coming on for me the past few years, but really specifically the past 2 years, but deeply the last even just few months is my relationship with plants as well and nature and tree energy medicine and being in total communion and knowing when a tree outside a little potted plant for example needs to come inside like literally just like it will just beckon to me or which one calls me to like the nursery to go pick it up and I was like I wasn't planning on going outside today in the pouring rain like I don't like to go really anywhere on the weekend where there's lots of people and it's raining and it's a Saturday and that place is going to be, maybe packed or wet or and it was just and I was supposed to go pick up a plant that was on sale, on sale, on sale, on sale. So it was like it was dead, it was bruised, it was limped, it was just and I mean my whole heart knew like and then I took it home and like within 2 hours it was like in its full regalia.
Hmm.
About 2 weeks later, she let me know I was supposed to go back and get her sister. And her sister was in far worse condition because now 2 more weeks had gone by. So I brought her home. And so it's like I have this whole nature sanctuary and it's a bit of an altar for me in certain mornings, other mornings not. But yeah, it's like a total communication, but also like what you were talking about. I can feel, I can feel my empathy, which is in my Venus sequence as a city placed there twice. So it didn't come natural for me at all. It was a very important thing for me to evolve into. But that was all of last year. And it made it hard, to be honest, to be able to feel and have that much empathy. No wonder I had suppressed it down, right? Because then when your gifts all start to come on, it's like, oh my gosh. But that's then where the other gifts come on of being able to reside in the great paradox of life of not non-attachment, right? Not having it be so precious, but yet really wanting to honor while I am here, what I am here for. That divine listening that does take courage for me at times. And it's interesting, and I'd be so curious to hear your thought. Like the more transparency you're able to see, do you experience that also then calling you in more so to being transparent yourself?
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really and this goes to what I was speaking about before of like showing up without fear of that I'm going to say something that's going to make somebody angry or whatever. Like that is all about being a clear channel and not needing to know what is going to come out of my mouth next.
Yes. Yes. It's interesting that you say that. Last year, I found myself saying with so many of my private mentorship clients, especially like, or even in groups, it was like, and I would preface it this way. I imagine you don't, you just do it. You just trust that if it wants to come through, it comes through. But the way that I would preface it with, do I have your blessing to be as courageous as I'm being
Mm.
asked to be in this moment right now? What wants to come through? I just want them to know I'm aware that it's there. I'm aware it wants to come through. I believe it could serve, but it's not because I'm trying to make you see something for some egoic benefit on my behalf. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I love that actually. That would be very helpful for me, and it's something that I don't do. Like to have permission from somebody else before I do it would be really helpful.
Oh, good. I just got the full body chills. That was helpful for so many of our listeners to hear as well, because then it takes the personalization off of it, right? It's almost like we're being assisted by the divine
Right.
realm of like, here's what could support y'all as you're navigating this conversation. Michelle's feeling more into her gifts. Jay's feeling more into his gifts. This person's here to be served. Is there the blessing, right? It's like this
Right.
could help us all level up because when one level is up, we all do.
For
right?
sure.
And what I've recognized within the coaching space, the transformational coaching space, especially, which I don't really identify with the term coach at all. But that said, there are very few that are willing to be courageous,
Hmm.
that are willing to say the thing that wants to be said. But yet, this is the only place that I know how to be right now. And I haven't yet still learned how to close that gap on social media. But I'm wondering if I ever will. I'm wondering if I ever have a need to do it in that way.
Yeah.
It's like you're going there and I'm watching you. I'm like, go, Jay, go. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know. And also, I'm kind of looking at other platforms now too, of like, maybe I just want to play there and go be inspired in those particular platforms. But there's some other platforms, like, for example, School. Have you heard of School
Yep.
yet? Yeah.
Yeah, that's where my squad lives, is on School, actually.
No way. That's
Yeah.
so cool. Oh, I love that. Okay. What's your squad there called so that we can find?
The Synarchy, actually, but it's only the people that are in my deep container. Like, I don't have a free group on there. I just use
Uh-huh.
that as kind of the hub for everyone that I go deep with.
Way cool. Okay, I'm starting the whole sacred sovereignty movement there, or whatever. Who knows? It'll be three people or 300. But I feel called to join School. So if y'all haven't heard about this, it's SKOOL. It looks like a child's, logo who's you drawn it with colored crayons. But it's a place where people are going to connect, where it's yeah, just I don't know, it feels more resonant for me. And I'm building that literally as we speak, but that's really cool. Jay, I feel like we might be close to time. So is there anything that you wish you would have been asked or that really wants to come through?
I would just say that the place that we are at right now as individuals and as humanity requires one thing, and it's not to get people to see it your way or to get your outcome to be the thing that shows up in the world.
Mm,
It's to be there and to be of support and to be of love for both sides of what is happening, because I promise that if you had the life experience of the person that is on the other side, you would have the same belief,
mm,
because we all have this same animating principle at the center of what we are. So the only thing that causes us to have these different opinions are the circumstances that happen to us in our lives.
mm,
And when you start to realize that, you start to realize that you don't need to be right. You don't need somebody else to hear you. You
mm,
just need to show up and be love, be the best human that you can be. So I would just ask that that is the commitment that you make to yourself moving forward, and watch how a life transforms before your eyes when you do.
mm. Thank you for that. Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you so much. Where can our audience find you best?
Yeah, so best place is YouTube, and it's just my name, which is Jay Cohen, Jaycohen, and then I'm just I play on Instagram, honestly. I do not try and get people to the business. Like, it's really just a place for me to share my thoughts. So if you want some weird thought sharing, that's not Jay Cohen, because I used to be Coach Jay Cohen, but I too do not resonate with that word at all. So it's not Jay Cohen, because on a deep level, I promise I am not Jay Cohen at Instagram.
Oh my God, I love it. I feel like I want to change mine to not Michelle Sorro. Because I am not, oh, it's this beautiful divine spark that really wanted to come through throughout the whole threading of this conversation. And this really was the embodiment, in my opinion, of two former humans as we knew ourselves, trying to sort out where we're going, what's happening. And really it just comes down to being present and living from our hearts and allowing ourselves to listen to those divine directives, right? And in service to all. That's it. Yeah.
And knowing that you're going to get it wrong. You're going to get it wrong over and over and over again. And that's okay. Just learn and keep going. That's part of this whole thing.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for coming on today. I'm looking forward to another one, hopefully in less than 6 months.
Sounds good, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And by the way, just as a quick little aside for everyone paying attention, I'm going to link our first conversation. I believe it was called a deep dive into the gene keys to get with God, and that'll be available. That was yeah, recorded about maybe 6 months ago. All right. Have a beautiful rest of your day, everyone. Lots of love.
Bye, guys.